In the small town of Blackwood, people hardly noticed Michael Carter. He lived a modest life in a 2-bedroom house at the edge of town with his 12-year-old daughter, Emily. Every morning he walked her to school, carrying her backpack when it looked too heavy, and every afternoon he waited near the school gates to bring her safely home. To most, Michael was nothing more than a quiet, polite man who preferred to stay out of people's way. He worked at a local hardware store, rarely spoke more than necessary, and never raised his voice. Parents in the neighborhood respected him for being a devoted single father. Kids, however, saw him as just another ordinary man who didn't matter. But Michael Carter was not ordinary. Years ago, before Emily was born, before he swore to bury that part of himself forever, Michael was known by another name, Raven. In the shadows of cities far away, Raven had been a ghost, a contract killer who never missed, a man whispered about, but never seen. He left behind a trail of silence, because the dead don't talk. No one in Blackwood knew this. Not the neighbors, not the parents at Emily's school, not even Emily herself. She knew her father as gentle, warm, and always protective, but never violent. And Michael intended to keep it that way, for Emily's sake. He had buried Raven years ago. He cut ties, vanished, and built a new life. A normal life, but fate has a cruel sense of humor. And on one ordinary afternoon, when Emily stepped out of her school, a group of teenage bullies decided to make Michael Carter their target. They had no idea who they were provoking. And Michael had no idea that the darkness he buried was about to claw its way back. The bell rang, and children spilled out of Blackwood Middle School, their laughter filling the air. Michael leaned casually against the chain-link fence, waiting for Emily. He spotted her quickly, her brown hair tied in a neat ponytail, a sketchbook tucked under her arm as always. She waved when she saw him, her smile bright enough to make the long day at work worth it. But before Emily reached him, a group of boys, 4 of them, maybe 15 or 16, stepped in her path. Their leader, a tall boy with a buzz cut named Dylan, smirked as he blocked her way. "Hey, art girl," he sneered, flicking the edge of her sketchbook. "Draw me something useful, like a brain." "You don't have one," the others laughed. Emily lowered her eyes, clutching the book to her chest. Michael straightened, his body tensing. He started forward, but then paused. He didn't want to embarrass her or make the situation worse. Dylan snatched the sketchbook out of her hands and flipped through it. "Wow, look at this crap. Horses, flowers, some ugly house. What are you, like 5? Emily's cheeks burned red. She whispered, "Give it back, or what?" Dylan mocked, tossing the book to another boy. They played keep away, laughing as Emily desperately tried to reach it. That was when Michael stepped forward. His shadow fell across the group, and the laughter died down slightly. "Give her the book," he said, his voice calm but edged with steel. The boys exchanged looks, and Dylan grinned. "Relax, old man. We're just having fun." Then, deliberately loud enough for Emily to hear, he spat out a string of vile curses aimed at her and her father. Emily froze, her small hands clenched into fists, her eyes watering. Michael's jaw tightened. For a moment, he felt something stir inside him, something sharp, dangerous, and familiar. His breathing slowed, his pulse steady, like it used to be before a job. He took a single step closer. The boys instinctively backed up. Though Dylan tried to mask his unease with a laugh, Michael looked directly at him, ice cold. "I won't ask again." There was silence. And then, for the first time in years, Michael Carter felt the raven shift beneath his skin. The group of boys didn't move at first. Dylan still held the sketchbook, his knuckles whitening around the edges of the worn pages. He smirked, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of hesitation. "You think we're scared of you," Dylan said, his voice cracking slightly. "You're just some washed-up dad. Nobody cares about you. Your daughter's a freak, and you're nothing." The words sliced through Emily like a knife. She turned away, her cheeks wet with silent tears. Michael saw the way she folded into herself, small and humiliated. That image burned deeper than any insult thrown at him. And then it happened. Dylan leaned closer, his breath reeking of cheap soda and arrogance, and whispered the kind of curse a boy his age should never have known, filthy, directly aimed at Emily. Michael's head tilted, slow and deliberate, his expression unreadable. The old instinct stirred like a monster waking from hibernation. His vision sharpened. Every sound, birds overhead, the shuffle of the boys' shoes on gravel, even Emily's shallow breathing faded into the background. Raven was listening now. Michael stepped closer, and his presence alone made two of the boys stumble back. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His tone dropped into a dangerous calm, the kind that makes the hair on your arm stand on end. "Say another word like that," Michael said quietly, his gaze locked on Dylan, "and I'll teach you the weight of silence." Dylan swallowed hard. For a moment, the bravado faltered, but peer pressure is a powerful thing. The others were watching, waiting for him to prove he wasn't afraid. So he laughed. "Scary speech, old man. What are you gonna do, call the cops?" "You don't scare me." Michael's eyes narrowed. Inside, Raven whispered the truth. "He doesn't believe you." "Make him believe." Emily tugged at her father's arm, her voice trembling. "Dad, let's just go." Michael forced his fists to unclench. With effort, he turned, guiding Emily away. The boys jeered behind them, shouting more curses, their laughter echoing across the schoolyard. Michael didn't look back, but inside, a storm was building. For the first time in 12 years, he wasn't sure he could hold it back. That evening, Michael sat at the small wooden table in their kitchen, while Emily quietly ate her dinner. She hadn't said much since they got home, her fork scraped against the plate, slow and mechanical. Michael forced himself to eat, but every bite tasted like ash. His daughter's silence was worse than the boys' insults. She wasn't talking because she was scared of them, but maybe, just maybe, scared of him too. Finally, Emily whispered, "Dad, why didn't you do anything?" Michael's chest tightened. He opened his mouth, but the words stuck. He couldn't tell her the truth, that he had done too much in his life, that every instinct inside him had screamed to snap bones and end laughter in blood. Instead, he forced a steady breath and said, "Because walking away was safer." "Violence doesn't solve everything, Emily." Her eyes, wide and still wet from earlier, searched his face. "But they cursed at me, in front of you. I thought you'd protect me." That shattered him. Michael excused himself, stepping out into the backyard. The night air was sharp, carrying the scent of pine. He lit a cigarette, his first in years, and stared at the stars. His hands trembled as he remembered Dylan's sneer, the boy's vile words. Inside his head, Raven laughed. "You can lie to her, but not to me." Those boys cross the line. They need to understand fear, the kind only we can give. Michael closed his eyes, exhaling smoke. No, she deserves her father, not a monster. But self-control was a fragile dam, and each memory of Emily's tears was another crack in the wall. The phone buzzed in his pocket. A message from an unknown number. "Raven, we know where you are." Michael froze. His blood ran cold. He hadn't heard that name in over a decade. It wasn't just the boys anymore. His past had just stepped out of the shadows. Sleep did not come easily that night. Emily had finally drifted off, curled up under her blanket, her sketchbook clutched against her chest like a shield. Michael stood in the hallway, watching her breathe, the glow of her nightlight painting soft shadows across her face. He whispered to himself, "You'll be safe. I'll keep you safe." But when he finally lay down, the darkness pressed in, dragging him back to places he thought he'd buried forever. In his dream, he wasn't Michael Carter the father. He was Raven again. The smell of gun oil filled his nostrils. The weight of the silenced pistol was familiar in his palm. He was in a warehouse, dimly lit, surrounded by faceless men in suits. They fell one by one, silently, efficiently. No hesitation, no remorse, only precision. Then, the dream shifted. The faceless men became teenagers, Dylan and his friends. Their jeers echoed through the shadows. Their laughter turned into screams. Blood sprayed against the walls. Emily's voice called out, faint and broken, "Dad, stop, please." Michael jolted awake, drenched in sweat, his pulse pounding like war drums. His hands shook, if they still gripped a weapon. For a moment, he didn't know where he was, past and present colliding in a blur of fear. He stumbled to the bathroom, splashing cold water on his face. The reflection in the mirror was a stranger's, eyes hard, jaw clenched, a killer's face, Raven's face. And then, the message from earlier replayed in his mind, "Raven, we know where you are." Michael gripped the sink, knuckles white. Who had sent it? Old enemies, former clients, or someone worse, someone he never should have trusted. Either way, he understood one thing: the boys at school were just a spark. But the fire waiting for him was much bigger. Emily stirred in her room, mumbling in her sleep. Michael straightened, wiped his face, and forced the monster back into its cage. But as he returned to bed, one truth haunted him: monsters don't stay locked up forever. The morning sun spilled over Blackwood, warm and bright, but Michael felt none of its comfort. His eyes were heavy from the sleepless night, his mind still echoing with the words on that text message. Raven's name burned like a scar he thought had healed. Still, life had to go on. He packed Emily's lunch, walked her to school, and forced a smile when she looked at him. She was quiet, cautious, as if she'd seen something in him yesterday she didn't fully understand. At the school gates, Michael kissed her forehead. "Have a good day, Em." But just as she disappeared into the building, he noticed them. Dylan and his friends leaned against the fence, waiting. Cigarettes dangled from their lips, smoke curling into the crisp morning air. They spotted Emily immediately. Dylan smirked, flicking ash onto the ground. "Morning, Princess," he called. His voice was casual, but laced with malice. Emily froze. Michael, a few steps away, saw her shoulders stiffen. Before she could escape, one of the boys shoved her lightly, just enough to make her stumble. Laughter followed. "Careful, freak. Wouldn't want you to trip." Something inside Michael snapped. He was across the street in seconds, faster than a man his age should have moved. His hand clamped around the boy's wrist before the kid even realized he was there. The boy yelped. Dylan laughed nervously. "Whoa, easy there, Grandpa. Don't break his arm." Michael's grip tightened, just enough to make the boy's knees buckle. His voice was low, meant only for Dylan to hear. "Touch her again, and I'll make sure you never touch anything again." For the first time, Dylan's grin faltered. But instead of backing down, he forced a laugh, masking his fear. "You think you scare us? You're just some loser, Dad, nothing more." Emily's eyes filled with panic. She tugged at her father's sleeve. "Dad, please, don't." Michael released the boy and stepped back. His control was thin, a glass wall ready to shatter. He turned, guiding Emily away, ignoring the jeers that followed them. But as he walked, Michael's senses sharpened. He could feel it, eyes on him, watching, measuring, not just the boys. Someone else was in the crowd. Someone who knew the name Raven. That afternoon, the autumn wind carried a chill through Blackwood. The leaves skittered across the pavement as Michael waited outside the school, leaning against a lamppost. He looked ordinary enough, just another father waiting for his daughter. But inside, Raven stirred restlessly. Emily appeared, clutching her sketchbook tightly. She spotted her father and hurried to him. But before she could reach safety, Dylan and his gang intercepted her again. Michael stepped forward, his expression unreadable. Dylan grinned, puffing out his chest in front of his friends. "Well, look who it is, Daddy the hero." Michael said nothing at first. He simply stared. His silence was heavy, unnerving. The boys shifted uneasily under his gaze, though Dylan forced a laugh to mask his nerves. "You don't scare me, old man," Dylan said. "This is our school, our town. You don't tell us what to do." Michael finally spoke, his voice calm, but edged with something darker, something ancient and dangerous. "Listen to me very carefully. If you ever put a hand on my daughter again, if you so much as whisper her name, I will show you a kind of fear you didn't know existed." Dylan's smirk faltered. His friends exchanged glances. The air felt heavier, colder, as if Michael's words carried more than just a threat, they carried truth. One of the boys muttered, "Dude, let's just go." But Dylan, his pride stung, spat on the ground. "You think I'm scared of some nobody? You're nothing, nothing." Michael's jaw clenched, but he didn't move. He just leaned in, close enough that only Dylan could hear. His voice dropped to a whisper, smooth and lethal. "Predators hide in the dark. Prey walks in the light. Do you know which one you are?" Dylan's bravado cracked. For a second, Michael saw it, the fear in his eyes, the recognition of something wrong in the quiet man standing before him. Then Emily tugged at Michael's sleeve again, her voice trembling. "Dad, please." Michael straightened, turned his back on them, and walked Emily home. But behind him, Dylan's face twisted with anger. He wasn't going to let this go. And somewhere else in Blackwood, hidden in the shadows, a pair of eyes followed Michael's every step, eyes that remembered Raven. The next morning at school, whispers spread through the hallways like wildfire. Dylan, still stung by Michael's quiet but terrifying warning, decided to strike back in the only way he knew how, by running his mouth. "Yo, that Carter guy. Emily's dad," Dylan said loudly in the cafeteria, surrounded by his crew. "He's not just some loser. People say he's a dangerous, like, really dangerous." One of the boys raised an eyebrow. "Dangerous how?" Dylan leaned in, lowering his voice just enough to draw them closer. "Old Mr. Jensen, you know. That creepy old dude who sits outside the pawn shop. He said Carter wasn't always Carter. Said he used to go by some other name, a name people were scared of." "What name?" another boy asked. Dylan's lips curled into a smirk. "Raven." The boys laughed nervously, but the word stuck. It had weight, an edge to it. Raven. It sounded like something out of a crime movie, not the name of a quiet single dad who worked at a hardware store. By the end of the day, students were whispering it in the hallways, repeating the rumor as if it were gospel. "Emily's dad is a killer. He used to be someone else. Stay away from her." Emily heard the whispers. She walked the halls with her head down, her face burning with shame. By the time she found her father waiting outside after school, her hands were trembling. "Dad," she whispered, clutching his sleeve. "Why are they saying those things about you?" Michael's stomach dropped. He crouched to meet her eyes, trying to keep his face calm. "What things, sweetheart? That you used to be someone else, that you were dangerous, that your name was Raven." Her voice cracked. "Is it true?" Michael froze. For a moment, Raven pressed against the walls of his mind, eager to break free, to admit everything. But Michael forced a smile, though it felt like a lie cutting his throat. "People talk, Emily. They make up stories. You know better than to listen to them." But Emily didn't look convinced. And behind her, Dylan and his friends watched from across the street, smirking. They had no idea just how close they were to pulling the mask off the quiet man of Blackwood. The sun dipped low over Blackwood, painting the streets in shades of gold and shadow. Michael and Emily walked home together, her silence pressing heavier than the autumn air. She hadn't spoken since asking about the rumors. Every step Michael took felt like he was walking on glass. Then came the sound, laughter, sharp, mocking. Dylan and his crew emerged from an alley ahead, blocking the sidewalk. Cigarette smoke swirled around them like a curtain. Dylan stepped forward, his grin wide and cruel. Well, look who it is." The freak and her scary dad. He spat the last word like venom. Michael tensed, placing a steadying hand on Emily's shoulder. "Keep walking," he murmured, but Dylan wasn't finished. He reached into his pocket, pulling out Emily's sketchbook, the same one he had stolen days earlier. He flipped it open and tore a page free, one of Emily's best drawings. He crumpled it into a ball and tossed it at Michael's feet. "Oops, guess Raven doesn't scare me after all." The name hit like a gunshot. Emily froze, staring up at her father in shock. Michael's control thinned to a razor's edge. He stepped forward, slow and deliberate, his shadow stretching across the boys. His voice was calm, almost gentle, yet it carried the weight of a loaded gun. "Give it back," Dylan laughed, trying to hold his ground. "Or what? You'll kill me? In front of your precious little girl? Go ahead, Raven. Show her who you really are." The other boys laughed nervously, but their eyes darted with unease. Something in Michael's posture was wrong, too still, too precise. In an instant, Michael moved. No warning, no wasted motion. His hand snapped out, twisting Dylan's wrist until the boy cried out and dropped the sketchbook. The sound of bone and tendon straining filled the air. The laughter died. Michael leaned in, his face inches from Dylan's, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't need a weapon. Don't ever forget that." Then he released him. Dylan stumbled back, clutching his wrist, eyes wide with something he had never felt before, fear. Emily stared at her father, her face pale. She picked up her sketchbook silently, hugging it to her chest. Michael knew the damage was done. Not to Dylan but to Emily, because tonight she had seen a piece of Raven. That night, the house was quiet, but the silence felt heavy, suffocating. Emily sat cold on the couch, her sketchbook clutched tightly in her lap. She didn't draw. She didn't even look at the pages. She just stared at her father. Michael sat across from her, pretending to read a newspaper, though the print blurred before his eyes. He could feel her gaze on him, sharp and searching. Finally, she spoke. "Dad." Her voice was small, fragile. "Who are you really?" Michael looked up slowly, folding the paper with care. "I'm your father. That's all that matters." "But they called you something else, Raven," Emily's voice cracked. "And today, the way you grabbed him, you weren't like yourself. You looked scary." The words cut deep. Michael wanted to tell her everything, to confess the blood on his hands, the sins he had buried. But how could he? How could he look into his daughter's innocent eyes and admit he had once been a monster? He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Emily, there are things in my past I'm not proud of, things I walked away from a long time ago. But I swear to you I would never hurt you. Everything I do now, everything, is to keep you safe." Her eyes shimmered with tears. "Safe from who?" Michael hesitated. The message flashed in his mind. "Raven, we know where you are." He forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Safe from anyone who'd ever tried to hurt you." Emily nodded faintly, but her trust was shaken. She turned away, hugging her sketchbook like a shield, and disappeared into her room. Michael sat alone in the dim light, his hands trembling. The mask of Michael Carter was slipping, and the shadow of Raven was bleeding through. And somewhere, he knew, Dylan and his friends weren't done. They would come again. And next time, he wasn't sure the quiet father could hold back the killer beneath. Dylan nursed his wrist, the pain lingering like a bruise to his pride. The memory of Michael's grip haunted him, those cold eyes, that effortless strength. But humiliation burned hotter than fear. He couldn't let it go. That evening, he gathered his crew behind the abandoned gas station on the edge of town. Cigarette smoke and nervous energy filled the air. "He made a fool out of me," Dylan hissed, pacing back and forth. "In front of all of you. In front of his daughter. Do you know what that means? If I don't do something, I'm finished. Everyone will think I'm weak." One of the boys, smaller and less sure, shifted uneasily. "Man, Maybe we should just leave it. He's not normal, you saw him. Dylan rounded on him. He's just some washed-up loser. He grabbed me. That's it. Big deal. We're not kids anymore, we can handle him. Another boy smoked, trying to hide his nerves. So what's the plan? Egg his house? Break a window? Dylan shook his head. No. That won't cut it. We scare him. We make him think twice about ever touching us again. He pulled a switchblade from his pocket, the blade gleaming under the streetlight. The others froze. Dylan, you're not serious. Oh, I'm serious. Dylan's grin was cold. We jump him, just enough to put him in his place. Show him he's not untouchable. And if his freak daughter's there, maybe she learns her dad isn't a hero after all. The boys exchanged uneasy glances, but Dylan's anger was infectious. None of them wanted to be the first to back down. They didn't know it yet, but they weren't planning an ambush. They were walking straight into one, because Michael Carter Raven had been watching them from the shadows the whole time. Night had fallen over Blackwood, the streets empty and silent. A cold wind whispered through the alleys as Dylan and his friends crept toward Michael's house. They carried flashlights, spray paint cans, and the bravado of youth, convinced they could finally make the quiet man pay. They didn't see the movement at the edge of the shadows, just a ripple of black, silent and precise. Michael had known they were coming before they even left the gas station. Raven was awake, alert, and watching. The boys reached the driveway. Dylan kicked a rock, sending it clattering across the pavement. He won't even see us coming, he whispered. Dude. I don't like this, one of his friends muttered. Something feels off. Dylan laughed, a sharp, nervous sound. Relax, he's just a dad. We'll scare him a little, that's all. Michael stepped from the shadows like a ghost. His presence was immediate, impossible to ignore. The boys froze. Drop everything, he said calmly. No movement, no hesitation, just the quiet authority of someone who had spent years in the shadows. Dylan grinned nervously, brandishing the switchblade. Or what, old man? Michael didn't flinch. He simply tilted his head, eyes narrowing. In an instant, the boys were on the ground. Not a scratch, not a scream, just a disorienting, precise force that left them helpless. Dylan stared up at him, wide-eyed, heart hammering. Do you understand now? Michael's voice was low, measured, but every word carried weight. I don't have to touch you to break you. The other boys whimpered, too stunned to move. The night stretched, thick and suffocating, as Raven's presence pressed down on them like a physical force. Michael stepped back, finally allowing them to scramble to their feet, shaken, broken by fear rather than violence. He turned, guiding Emily safely out of the room. She had been watching from the window, her heart pounding, finally seeing the truth of the man she called her father. Dylan and his friends ran into the night, their laughter gone, replaced by a deep, instinctual terror. And Michael knew this wasn't over. Not for them. Not for him, because once Raven woke, there was no forgetting. Dylan hadn't slept all night. Every shadow in his room seemed to move. Every creak of the old floorboards made his heart leap. He kept thinking about the way Michael had looked at him, the stillness, the calm precision, the predator's patience. By mid-morning, he couldn't take it anymore. He convinced himself he had to go back and prove he wasn't afraid. This time, he thought, he would confront Michael head-on. He found Dylan and his friends wandering near the edge of Michael's property again, whispering and plotting. We'll corner him this time, Dylan muttered. Show him he can't just snap his fingers and scare us. They didn't notice the shift in the air. Not until Michael emerged from the shadows, silent as night itself. Raven wasn't wearing a mask, he was the mask. Dylan, Michael said softly, almost gently. But every word carried a weight that pressed down on Dylan's chest. Dylan tried to smirk. Aya, we were just leaving, no big deal. Michael stepped closer, the distance closing, his presence suffocating. No, you came here for a reason. To test me, to provoke me. Do you understand what happens to those who do that? Dylan shook, trying to hide his fear behind defiance. I'm not scared of you. Michael's eyes locked on him, and for the first time, Dylan felt the predator. Every instinct screamed at him, run, pray, beg. Instead, he froze. Michael didn't move violently, didn't even raise a hand. Yet the sheer weight of his gaze, the precision, the aura of danger, made Dylan's knees buckle. He dropped to the ground, gasping. Good, Michael said quietly. Now remember this. I am your warning. I am your silence. Cross me again. And it won't just be fear you feel, it will be regret that lasts your entire life. The boys scrambled, stammering apologies, and ran without looking back. Dylan's pride was shattered, replaced by a deep, gnawing terror. Emily watched from the window, her eyes wide, finally seeing her father for what he truly was. Not just a quiet man, but a force, a shadow, a protector who had lived in a darkness most could never survive. And Michael knew one truth clearly. The world had a new boundary now, drawn in fear, in shadows, and it was for his daughter's safety. The night fell over Blackwood like a velvet curtain. The streets were empty, silent to silent. Michael sat in the living room, Emily beside him, both of them watching the shadows stretch across the walls. Emily finally spoke, her voice small. Dad, will they come back? Michael's eyes darkened, the faintest glint of Raven stirring in his gaze. Maybe, he said softly. But they won't get close, not ever again, not to you. She shivered. But what if they try? Michael leaned forward, resting his hands on the table, and spoke in a voice so low it was almost a growl, a whisper meant to linger in the mind long after it was spoken. Anyone who steps into our lives with harm in their hearts will face me. And they won't just be scared, they'll know what it's like to meet the darkness I once lived in. The kind of darkness that doesn't forget, the kind that leaves marks on more than just the body. Emily's eyes widened, part awe, part fear. She could feel the weight behind the words, the centuries of shadows in them. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, carrying the faintest hint of distant laughter of those boys thinking they could challenge her father again. Michael stood, walking to the window. He stared out at the empty street, his hand resting on the sill. Let this be clear, he murmured. I am a quiet man now, a father, but I am not weak. And Raven never dies. The message was clear. Anyone who dared to harm Emily would meet the wrath of a man who had lived in darkness, survived it, and mastered it. Emily clung to him, finally understanding the man who had protected her all her life, not just with his hands, but with the storm that lived inside him. Outside, in the shadows, the wind whispered warnings, and Michael Carter, quiet father and former predator, stood ready, watching, waiting, prepared to unleash the ghost of Raven if anyone dared cross the line again. Days passed in Blackwood, each one quieter than the last. Dylan and his friends didn't show their faces near Michael's home again. The whispered rumors had grown into fearful silence. The boys had learned too late that some lessons could only be taught with fear, and that Michael Carter was no ordinary man. Emily walked to school confidently now, her sketchbook tucked safely under her arm. She noticed fewer whispers, fewer sideways glances. Children no longer dared mock her. The weight of what had happened hung in the air, invisible but palpable. Michael watched from the sidewalk as she laughed with a friend, the sunlight catching her hair. The man she saw every day, the gentle, quiet father, had done what was necessary. Raven had been there, hidden just beneath the surface, a ghost lingering to protect his daughter. That night, Michael sat in his living room, alone. The house was dark, still. The storm inside him, the part called Raven, receded like the tide, returning to its cage. He ran a hand over his face, letting out a long, quiet breath. Emily appeared at the doorway, holding a drawing she had made that day. "Daddy, look," she said softly. "It's us." Michael smiled, genuine and warm, ruffling her hair. "It's perfect, Em, just like you." Outside, the world was calm. The streets of Blackwood were quiet. The boys who had dared to challenge him had disappeared from his life, their arrogance replaced by lessons written in fear. Inside, the father and daughter shared a small, ordinary moment. The shadows of the past lingered, but no longer threatened their peace. Silence had returned, hard-won, fragile, but theirs. And in that silence, Michael Carter finally let Raven rest.